The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty depot in Sierra City, California, and Samuel Edwards felt his throat go dry as a woman stepped down onto the wooden platform, her traveling dress dusty from the long journey but her bearing proud and steady. He had expected someone young, perhaps 19 or 20, fresh-faced and uncertain, but the woman who stood before him carried herself with a confidence that could only come from years of living. And as she turned to face him, he saw laugh lines around her eyes and a maturity in her expression that told him she was at least 35 if not older. Samuel was 33 himself, and he had thought that requesting a mail-order bride younger than him would be the proper thing to do. But as she looked at him with those intelligent hazel eyes, he felt something shift in his chest. The correspondence had never mentioned her age specifically, and perhaps there had been a misunderstanding at the agency back east, but as she walked toward him with measured steps, he found himself thinking that maybe this was exactly what he needed. Mr. Edwards. Her voice was rich and warm, with the slightest hint of a southern accent that spoke of Georgia or perhaps the Carolinas. Yes, madam, and you must be Miss Victoria. He took off his hat, suddenly aware of the dust on his own clothes from working the ranch all morning. Sarah Victoria, yes. She extended her hand, and he shook it, surprised by the firmness of her grip. I hope the journey's delay hasn't caused you too much inconvenience. The train was held up in Sacramento for 2 days. No inconvenience at all. He found himself studying her face, the way the afternoon sun caught the strands of silver that threaded through her dark brown hair. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth, her features strong and defined, her mouth generous and expressive. I hope your travels weren't too difficult. I've endured worse. There was a story behind those words, but she didn't elaborate, and Samuel didn't press. I must confess, Mr. Edwards, that I'm older than you might have expected. The agency assured me that you were looking for a capable woman to help run a ranch, and I didn't think to emphasize my age in my letters. If this is a problem, I understand, and I can take the next stage back to Sacramento. Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that he had been holding his breath. She was watching him with a mixture of pride and vulnerability, prepared to be rejected but not willing to apologize for who she was. In that moment, something clicked into place in his mind. Good thing I like experience, he said, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed her entire face. The tension left her shoulders, and she laughed, a sound that was genuine and unguarded. Well then, Mr. Edwards, I believe we might get along just fine. He collected her trunk from the depot, surprised by its weight, and loaded it into the back of his wagon. Sarah climbed up onto the seat beside him without assistance, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. As they rolled out of Sierra City and onto the dirt road that led to his ranch, Samuel found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, looking out at the rolling hills that stretched toward the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance. "About 5 miles from town. It's not the biggest spread in the county, but it's mine, free and clear. I've got about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land for decent grazing." He glanced at her. "It's a lot of work for one person, which is why I thought it might be time to find a wife." "A practical reason for marriage," Sarah said, and he couldn't quite read her tone. "Partly practical," he admitted. "But I won't lie to you, Miss Victoria, I'm lonely out there. I've been working that ranch for 10 years, ever since I saved enough to buy the land, and it's a good life, but it's a solitary one. I want someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to build something with." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Edwards. I'll be honest with you as well. I'm 38 years old. I was married once when I was 19 to a man who died of fever 5 years later. I never remarried, partly because I was caring for my mother until she passed 2 years ago, and partly because I found that I had grown accustomed to independence. But independence can be lonely too, and when I saw your advertisement, something in your words spoke to me. What did I say that caught your attention? Samuel was genuinely curious. You said you were looking for a partner, not just a housekeeper or a decoration. You said you wanted someone with strength and intelligence. Those aren't words most men use when they're looking for a wife. She turned to look at him directly. I'm not a young girl who will simper and defer to your every word, Mr. Edwards. I have opinions and I'm accustomed to speaking them. If that's going to be a problem, it's better we know now. Samuel felt a smile tugging at his lips. I think I'd find a simpering wife pretty tiresome, Miss Victoria. I spent enough time around men who expect their women to be silent and obedient, and I never understood the appeal. What's the point of sharing your life with someone if you can't have a real conversation? Then we understand each other. Sarah settled back against the seat, and he noticed that she was studying the landscape with keen interest. The land is beautiful here, different from what I'm used to. I grew up in South Carolina and everything was green and humid. This is so dry and open. It takes some getting used to, Samuel agreed. But there's a beauty to it. Wait until you see the sunset over the mountains. It's like the whole sky catches fire. They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Samuel found himself stealing glances at her profile. She had a straight nose and a determined chin, and there was something about the way she held herself that suggested she had faced hardship and come through it stronger. He realized that he was already thinking of her as Sarah rather than Miss Victoria, already imagining her in his home, at his table, in his life. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, and Samuel felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. The house was solid, built from good timber with a wide porch that caught the evening breeze, but it was a bachelor's home, functional and sparse. He wondered what she would think of it. It's lovely, Sarah said, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. You've got a good setup here, Mr. Edwards. The house is well situated and the barn looks sturdy. Is that a vegetable garden? An attempt at one, Samuel said ruefully. I'm better with cattle than I am with plants. I managed to keep some potatoes and onions growing, but that's about it. I'm good with gardens, Sarah said. My mother and I kept a large one and we preserved enough vegetables to last through the winter. I could help you expand it if you'd like. I'd like that very much. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then moved to help Sarah down. She accepted his hand, and he felt the calluses on her palm, evidence that she was no stranger to hard work. He showed her around the property, pointing out the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop that needed repairs, the small bunkhouse that stood empty. I had a hired hand for a while, but he moved on last spring to try his luck in the gold fields. Haven't replaced him yet. Do you need help with the heavy work? Sarah asked, practical as always. I manage most of it, but during roundup and branding, I hire some men from town. It would be helpful to have someone who could handle the cooking and supplies when there's a crew here. He hesitated. But I don't want you to think that's all I'm looking for. I meant what I said about wanting a partner. I know you did. Sarah looked at him with those intelligent eyes. Show me the house, Mr. Edwards. I'd like to see where I'll be living. The house was cleaner than most bachelor establishments, which Samuel took some pride in, but it was still sparse. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. There were 2 bedrooms, a luxury he had built in with the hope of eventually having a family, and a small room that served as his office. It needs a woman's touch, Sarah said, walking through the rooms with her hands clasped behind her back. "But the bones are good. You built this yourself." "With some help from neighbors. It took 2 summers, but I wanted it done right." Samuel watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. "The bedroom on the right is mine. The other one is prepared for you. I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you right away, Miss Victoria. We can take our time getting to know each other. The marriage doesn't have to be consummated until you're ready." Sarah turned to face him, and there was approval in her expression. "That's considerate of you, Mr. Edwards. I appreciate it. Though I should tell you that I'm a grown woman and I understand what marriage entails. I'm not frightened or reluctant. I simply think it's wise for us to become comfortable with each other first." "Agreed." Samuel felt relief wash over him. "Are you hungry?" "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage some bacon and beans." "Let me cook," Sarah said, already removing her traveling jacket. "You've been working all day, and I've been sitting on a stage and then a wagon. I'd welcome the chance to move around." Samuel showed her where he kept his supplies, and Sarah surveyed them with a critical eye. "You need more variety in your provisions. When we go to town next, I'll make a list, but I can make something decent with what's here." He sat at the table and watched her work, marveling at the efficiency of her movements. She had brought the kitchen to life simply by being in it, and the smell of cooking food filled the house with a warmth it had been missing. She made biscuits from scratch, fried the bacon crisp, and created a gravy that transformed the simple meal into something approaching comfort food. They ate together as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, just as Samuel had promised. Sarah paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, staring out the window in wonder. "You were right," she said softly. "It's breathtaking." "It never gets old," Samuel replied. "I've seen it hundreds of times and it still stops me in my tracks." After dinner, Sarah insisted on cleaning up while Samuel brought in her trunk. He set it in the smaller bedroom, noting the simple furniture he had built, the quilt his sister had made for him before she moved back east, the wildflowers he had picked that morning and placed in a jar on the dresser. The flowers had seemed like a good idea at the time, but now he worried they looked foolish. "The flowers are lovely," Sarah said from behind him, making him jump. "Thank you for thinking of it. I wanted you to feel welcome." Samuel turned to face her, suddenly awkward in the small room. "I know this isn't what you probably expected. A ranch in the middle of nowhere, a man you've never met, but I promise I'll do my best to be a good husband to you." Sarah stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "Mr. Edwards, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to listen carefully. I chose to come here. I read your letters, all of them, and I made a decision based on what I learned about you. You're honest, you're hardworking, and you treated me with respect in every word you wrote. That's more than many women get from the men they marry. I don't expect perfection. I expect partnership. Can you offer me that?" "Yes," Samuel said without hesitation. "I can offer you that. Then we'll be fine." She smiled at him, and he felt his heart do a strange flip in his chest. "Now, I'm exhausted from traveling, and I'm sure you have work to do in the morning. We should both get some rest." Samuel nodded and retreated to his own room, but he found sleep elusive. He lay in his bed, listening to the sounds of Sarah moving around in the other room, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric as she changed into her nightgown. He thought about the twist of fate that had brought him an older bride instead of a younger one, and he found that he was grateful for it. There was something about Sarah Victoria that called to him, something beyond physical attraction, though he couldn't deny that he found her beautiful. She had a solidity to her, a groundedness that made him feel like he could trust her with his dreams and his fears. The next morning, Samuel woke before dawn as he always did, and was surprised to find Sarah already up, dressed in a simple work dress, her hair braided down her back. She had coffee brewing and was mixing batter for pancakes. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind. I've always been an early riser. Mind, I'm impressed." Samuel poured himself coffee and inhaled the rich aroma. "This is better than what I usually make." "That's because you were probably boiling the grounds instead of letting them steep properly." Sarah flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "My mother taught me that good coffee is the foundation of a good day." They ate breakfast together, and Samuel found himself telling her about his plans for the day, asking her opinion on whether he should move the cattle to the north pasture or wait another week. Sarah listened carefully and asked intelligent questions, and by the time they finished eating, Samuel felt like he had known her for years instead of hours. "I'll need to go into town in a few days to file the marriage paperwork," Samuel said as he prepared to head out to check on the herd. "We could do it today if you prefer, but I thought you might want a few days to settle in first." Sarah considered this, her head tilted slightly. "A few days sounds reasonable. It will give us time to be certain this is what we both want. Are you having doubts?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "No," Sarah said firmly, "but I think it's fair to give both of us the option to change our minds without legal complications. Don't you agree?" "I suppose that's wise," Samuel admitted, though a part of him wanted to ride into town immediately and make sure she couldn't leave. He pushed the feeling aside, recognizing it as irrational. "I'll be back around noon to check on you." "I'll be fine," Sarah assured him. "I thought I'd start by taking inventory of what you have and making a list of what we need. Then maybe I'll explore the property a bit." Samuel spent the morning riding the fence line and checking on his cattle, but his mind kept drifting back to the ranch house and the woman inside it. He found himself hurrying through his work, eager to get back to her, and when he finally rode into the yard just after midday, he felt a surge of pleasure at seeing her hanging laundry on the line he had strung between two posts. "I found your dirty clothes and took the liberty of washing them," Sarah called out. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind? You're a miracle worker." Samuel dismounted and walked over to where she stood. "I usually let it pile up until I run out of clean shirts." Sarah laughed. "That's because washing is a chore when you're doing it for one person. When you're washing for two, it makes more sense to do it regularly." She pinned up one of his shirts, smoothing out the wrinkles with her hand. "How are the cattle?" "Fine. The grass is still good in the south pasture, so I'll keep them there for another week." Samuel watched her work, admiring the capable way she handled even the mundane tasks. "Did you make that list?" "I did. It's quite long, I'm afraid. You need everything from flour to thread to proper dishes." "How have you been eating off tin plates for 10 years? "They don't break," Samuel said defensively, and Sarah laughed again. "Fair point, but a man deserves to eat off real plates in his own home. We'll get some when we go to town." Over the next 3 days, Samuel watched Sarah transform his house into a home. She cleaned every corner, organized his chaotic pantry, mended his clothes, and planted seeds in the garden. She moved through the space with a confidence that suggested she had already claimed it as her own. And Samuel found that he liked coming home to find her there, liked the sound of her humming as she worked, liked the way she asked him about his day and actually listened to his answers. On the evening of the third day, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars come out in the vast California sky. Samuel had brought out 2 chairs and they sat side by side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I've been thinking," Sarah said quietly, "about the marriage." Samuel's heart clenched, and I think we should go ahead with it." She turned to look at him, her face serious in the starlight. "I know it's only been 3 days, but I feel comfortable here, Samuel, more comfortable than I've felt anywhere in a long time." You're a good man, and I think we could build a good life together." Samuel felt like he could breathe again. "I feel the same way. I know this arrangement started as something practical, but I'm finding that I enjoy your company, Sarah. I like talking to you. I like having you here. And I think, given time, we could have something real." "I think so too." Sarah reached over and took his hand, and the simple gesture felt monumental. "So let's make it official. Let's go to town tomorrow and get married." They rode into Sierra City the next morning, Sarah wearing her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and Samuel in his Sunday suit that he had brushed clean of dust. The town was busy with midweek commerce, and Samuel nodded to several people he knew as they made their way to the courthouse. The marriage ceremony was brief, conducted by Judge Morrison in his chambers, with 2 clerks serving as witnesses. Samuel had known the judge for years, and the older man's eyebrows rose slightly when he saw Sarah, clearly noting that she was not the young bride people might have expected, but he said nothing beyond the required words of the ceremony. "Do you, Samuel Edwards, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Samuel's voice was steady. "And do you, Sarah Victoria, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Sarah's voice was equally firm. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Edwards." Samuel turned to Sarah, suddenly nervous, but she smiled at him and leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a gentle kiss that was over almost before it began. But it was enough. It was a promise. They signed the papers, and Judge Morrison shook both their hands. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards. I hope you'll be very happy together." "Thank you, Judge," Samuel said, and led his new wife out of the courthouse. They spent the afternoon in town, shopping for the items on Sarah's list. Samuel introduced her to the merchants he knew, and he noticed the speculation in their eyes as they took in his older bride. But Sarah handled the attention with grace, charming the shopkeepers with her friendly manner and her evident knowledge of what she was buying. At the general store, they ran into Margaret Wheeler, the wife of a neighboring rancher. Margaret was a kind woman in her 50s who had always been friendly to Samuel, and she greeted them warmly. "Samuel, I heard you had gotten yourself a mail-order bride. You must be Mrs. Edwards." She extended her hand to Sarah. "Welcome to Sierra City, dear. We're always glad to have new people in the area." "Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler. It's lovely to meet you." Sarah shook her hand with a smile. "You must come to dinner soon," Margaret said. "I know it can be lonely out on the ranches, especially for a woman new to the area. I'd be happy to introduce you to some of the other wives." "I'd like that very much," Sarah said, and Samuel could tell she meant it. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Samuel felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. He had a wife now, a real wife, and she seemed genuinely happy to be with him. The fact that she was older than he had expected no longer mattered. In fact, he was beginning to think it was one of the best things that could have happened. They drove back to the ranch as the sun began to set, and Samuel found himself hyper-aware of the gold ring on Sarah's finger, the matching band on his own hand. They were married now, truly married, and that meant tonight would be their wedding night. Sarah seemed to be thinking the same thing because she was quieter than usual on the ride home. When they pulled into the yard, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, and their hands lingered together for a moment longer than necessary. "Let me help you unload," Sarah said, reaching for one of the boxes in the wagon bed. "I can do it," Samuel protested, but she gave him a look. "We're partners, remember. That means we share the work." They unloaded the wagon together, and Sarah put away the provisions while Samuel took care of the horses. By the time he came back to the house, She had lit the lamps and was preparing dinner, moving around the kitchen that was now truly hers. They ate quietly, the weight of unspoken expectations hanging in the air between them. Finally, as Sarah cleared away the dishes, Samuel spoke. "Sarah, I want you to know that I meant what I said before, about not expecting anything tonight. We can take our time." Sarah turned to face him, drying her hands on a towel. "Samuel, I appreciate your consideration, but I'm not a nervous young girl. I know what I agreed to when I married you, and I'm not opposed to the idea of sharing your bed." She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "But I'll admit that I'm a bit nervous. It's been many years since I was with a man." Samuel stood and walked over to her, taking the towel from her hands and setting it aside. "Then we'll take it slow. There's no rush. We have the rest of our lives." He leaned down and kissed her, and this time it was longer, deeper, a real kiss that made his heart race. Sarah's arms came up around his neck, and she pressed against him, and Samuel felt desire kindle in his belly. But he kept his movements gentle, his hands respectful, giving her time to adjust to his touch. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Sarah looked up at him with darkened eyes, and Samuel saw no fear there, only curiosity and a growing passion that matched his own. "Come to bed with me," he said softly, and Sarah nodded. That night, in the darkness of the bedroom that was now theirs together, they came together with a tenderness that surprised them both. Samuel took his time, learning the landscape of Sarah's body, discovering what made her gasp and what made her sigh. She was generous with her own touches, her hands exploring him with a boldness that spoke of her maturity and her confidence. And when they finally joined, it felt like a homecoming, like two pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Samuel's arm around Sarah's waist, her head on his chest. He could feel her breathing slow as she drifted toward sleep, and he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Sarah's voice was drowsy. "For taking a chance on me, for coming all this way, for being you." Sarah tilted her head up to look at him, and even in the dim light, he could see the emotion in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, Samuel. Not just an older woman, not just a mail-order bride, but me. For seeing that I had value." "You have more value than you know," Samuel said fiercely. "I'm the lucky one here." Sarah smiled and kissed his chest before settling back down. "Then we're both lucky. And that's the best way to start a marriage, don't you think?" Samuel agreed, and they fell asleep in each other's arms, the beginning of their life together officially begun. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Samuel learned that Sarah was a woman of strong opinions who wasn't afraid to voice them. She disagreed with him about how to organize the barn, where to plant the vegetable garden, and whether they needed more chickens. But instead of being irritated by her challenges, Samuel found that he enjoyed the debates. Sarah made him think, made him examine his assumptions, and more often than not, her suggestions turned out to be improvements. Sarah learned that Samuel was more sensitive than his rough exterior suggested, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and that he was unfailingly kind to the animals in his care. She watched him doctor a horse with a stone bruise, speaking softly to the animal as he worked, and she felt her heart soften toward him even more. They established routines together. Samuel would wake first and start the fire. Then Sarah would rise and make breakfast while he did the morning chores. They would eat together, discussing the day's plans, and then Samuel would head out to work the ranch while Sarah tackled the endless tasks of keeping a household running. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for their future. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Sarah brought up a topic that had been on her mind. "Samuel, have you thought about expanding the ranch? You have good land here and you could easily run more cattle." "I've thought about it," Samuel admitted, "but it would require more help. I can manage 200 head on my own, but anything more would need at least one hired hand, maybe two." "What if we could afford it?" Sarah asked. "I have some money saved. Not a fortune, but enough to hire help for a season. If we increased the herd and had a good year, we could make enough to sustain the extra expense going forward." Samuel looked at her in surprise. "You'd be willing to invest your savings in the ranch? It's not just your ranch anymore, Samuel. It's ours. And I think we could make something really successful here if we're smart about it." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Think about it. With more cattle, we'd have more income. With more income, we could improve the property, maybe build a bigger barn, get better equipment. We could even think about raising horses for sale. You told me you have a good eye for horseflesh." Samuel felt excitement building in his chest. He had dreamed of expanding the ranch for years, but he had never had the capital or the help to do it. "You really think we could make it work?" "I do. But only if we plan it carefully. We'd need to hire good men, men we can trust. And we'd need to make sure we have enough supplies to get through a hard winter if necessary. But yes, I think we could make it work." They talked late into the night, planning and scheming, and by the time they went to bed, they had the outline of a plan. Samuel felt energized in a way he hadn't in years, and he realized that this was what he had been missing all along. Not just a wife, but a true partner, someone who shared his vision and had the courage to take risks. The next week, Samuel rode into town and hired 2 men who had recently arrived in Sierra City looking for work. Jack Morrison was a young man of 25, strong and eager, with a reputation for being good with horses. Tom Sullivan was older, in his 40s, a weathered cowboy who had worked ranches from Texas to Montana and knew cattle inside and out. Samuel brought them back to the ranch and introduced them to Sarah, who had prepared a meal for them all. Over dinner, Sarah questioned the 2 men about their experience and their expectations, and Samuel was impressed by her astuteness. She could tell that Jack was honest but inexperienced, while Tom was competent but wary. By the end of the meal, she had put both men at ease and established herself as someone they would respect. With help on the ranch, Samuel was able to purchase another 100 head of cattle from a rancher near Sacramento who was retiring. The herd now numbered 300, and the ranch felt alive with activity. Jack and Tom bunked in the small bunkhouse, and Sarah made sure they were well fed and fairly treated. She discovered that both men appreciated her cooking and her no-nonsense attitude, and they quickly became loyal to the Edwards household. As fall turned to winter, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Samuel and his men worked long days moving cattle, repairing fences, and preparing for the cold months ahead. Sarah expanded the vegetable garden and put up preserves, salted meat, and made sure they had enough supplies to last through any storms. She also began to make friends with the other ranch wives in the area, attending church socials and quilting bees, becoming part of the community. One cold November evening, as Samuel and Sarah sat by the fire, she made an announcement that took his breath away. "I think I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Samuel stared at her, his mind racing. "You think? You're not sure?" "I'm fairly sure. I've missed my monthly courses twice now, and I've been feeling queasy in the mornings." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "I know I'm not young, Samuel. Childbirth at my age can be dangerous, but I want this baby. I want our baby." Samuel crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Of course you do. Of course we do. We'll be careful. We'll get the best doctor we can find." "You're going to be fine, Sarah. We both are." But despite his confident words, Samuel felt fear gnawing at his gut. He knew the statistics, knew that older women faced greater risks in childbirth. The thought of losing Sarah, of losing the woman who had become the center of his world in just a few short months, was unbearable. Sarah seemed to sense his fear because she cupped his face in her hands and looked into his eyes. "I'm strong, Samuel. I'm healthy. Women my age have babies all the time. We're going to be fine." Samuel wanted to believe her, and so he did. He became protective of her, insisting that she not overwork herself, that she rest more, that she let him handle tasks she normally would have done. Sarah tolerated his hovering with good humor, but she also continued to do her work, refusing to be treated like an invalid. As her pregnancy progressed through the winter, Sarah bloomed. Her face filled out, her eyes sparkled, and she moved through the house with a contentment that Samuel had never seen before. She talked to the baby constantly, telling it stories about its father, about the ranch, about the life they were building together. Samuel found himself falling more in love with her every day. He loved the way she looked with her hand resting on her growing belly, loved the way she would grab his hand and place it over her stomach so he could feel the baby kick, loved the way she planned for their future with such certainty and joy. Margaret Wheeler visited often, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from her own grown children. She helped Sarah prepare the second bedroom as a nursery, sewing curtains and knitting blankets. The other ranch wives rallied around as well, bringing gifts and offering support, and Sarah was touched by the generosity of her new community. Spring came early that year, and as the snow melted from the mountains and the grass turned green again, Sarah grew large and uncomfortable. The baby was due in late April, and Samuel made sure that Dr. Harrison from town knew to be ready to come at a moment's notice. On a warm April morning, Sarah woke Samuel before dawn with a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," she said simply. Samuel bolted out of bed, suddenly clumsy with nerves. "I'll get the doctor. I'll ride to town right now." "There's no need to panic," Sarah said calmly, though he could see the strain in her face. "The pains are still far apart. Send Tom to get the doctor. You stay with me." Samuel woke Tom, who immediately saddled a horse and rode hard for Sierra City. Then, Samuel returned to the house to find Sarah moving around the bedroom, preparing things with steady hands despite the occasional grimace of pain. "What can I do?" Samuel felt helpless, useless. "You can hold my hand and tell me I'm doing well," Sarah said with a slight smile. "And you can trust that I know what I'm doing. This isn't my first time giving birth." Samuel froze. "What? But you said you never had children." Sarah's face softened with old grief. "I didn't say that. I said I never remarried. My husband and I had a baby girl when I was 20. She lived for 3 days." Her voice broke slightly. "I never spoke of it because it was too painful. But I've been through labor before, Samuel. I know what to expect." Samuel gathered her into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I didn't know. How could you? I didn't tell you." Sarah pulled back and looked at him seriously. "But this baby is going to be fine. I can feel it. This baby is strong like us." The labor was long and hard. Dr. Harrison arrived by mid-morning and took charge, sending Samuel out of the room despite his protests. Samuel paced the main room, listening to Sarah's cries with his fists clenched and his heart in his throat. Jack and Tom kept him company, both men uncomfortable but trying to offer support. As the sun began to set, Sarah's cries reached a crescendo, and then Samuel heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the wail of a newborn baby. Dr. Harrison opened the bedroom door, his sleeves rolled up and a smile on his tired face. "Congratulations, Mr. Edwards. You have a son, and your wife is doing well." Samuel pushed past him into the room and found Sarah propped up on pillows, sweaty and exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was like the sun coming out. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Samuel approached the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the baby in Sarah's arms. He was small and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. Samuel felt his eyes fill with tears. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He is," Sarah agreed. "I was thinking we could name him Stephen after my father, Stephen Edwards." Samuel tried the name out and found that he liked the sound of it. "It's perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Sarah, and together they looked at their son, at the new life they had created together. Samuel thought about the day Sarah had stepped off the stagecoach, older than he expected, confident and capable and unlike anyone he had imagined. He thought about how he had almost been disappointed, how he had expected someone young and malleable, and he thanked whatever fate had sent him Sarah instead. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now, though he had never said them before. Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I love you too, Samuel, so much." They sat together as the night deepened, their son sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, and Samuel felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. This was what it meant to have a family. This was what it meant to be truly home. The months after Stephen's birth were chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. The baby was healthy and strong, with good lungs that he used to make his needs known at all hours of the night. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, though Samuel continued to fuss over her, much to her amusement. She nursed the baby and cared for him with a competence born of experience and loss, cherishing every moment with a gratitude that came from knowing how fragile life could be. Samuel discovered the profound joy and terror of fatherhood. He held his son with trembling hands, terrified of dropping him or holding him wrong, but Stephen seemed to thrive on his father's attention. As the weeks passed, Samuel grew more confident, learning to change diapers and soothe crying and walk the floor with Stephen when he wouldn't sleep. Jack and Tom were surprisingly helpful, both men charmed by the baby and willing to take on extra work to give Samuel and Sarah more time with their son. The ranch continued to thrive, the cattle fattening on good grass, the horses multiplying as Samuel bred his best mares. By the end of summer, it was clear that Sarah's investment and planning had paid off. They had turned a profit large enough to pay off their debts and still have money to save for the future. As fall arrived again, painting the hills in shades of gold and red, Sarah and Samuel celebrated their first anniversary. They left Stephen with Margaret Wheeler for the evening and rode out to a spot Samuel knew, a high meadow with a view of the entire valley. "I can't believe it's only been a year," Sarah said, sitting beside Samuel on a blanket he had brought. "It feels like we've been together forever." "In the best way," Samuel agreed. He took her hand, marveling as always at the calluses that spoke of shared work, the gold band that proclaimed her as his. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Sarah. You've given me everything I didn't even know I wanted. You've given me the same." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "A home, a family, a purpose. I thought my life was settled, that I would live alone and independent until I died. But you showed me that there was another way, that I could have partnership and love without losing myself." Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know something. That first day when you stepped off the stage and you were older than I expected, I had a moment of doubt, just a moment. And then you looked at me with those eyes and you stood so proud and strong, and I knew you were exactly what I needed, and I was right. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. They sat together as the sun set, holding each other, and Samuel thought about the strange paths that life took, the unexpected turns that led to happiness. They rode back to the ranch in the darkness, guided by starlight and the knowledge of home waiting for them. Stephen was sleeping peacefully when they retrieved him from Margaret's, and they carried him home together, tucking him into his cradle in the corner of their bedroom. That night, Sarah and Samuel made love with a passion deepened by a year of partnership and parenthood, by shared joys and shared struggles. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Sarah spoke into the quiet. "I want to have more children," she said. "I know I'm not young and I know it's a risk, but I want Stephen to have brothers and sisters. I want to fill this house with family." Samuel tightened his arms around her. "Are you sure? The birth was hard on you. Every birth is hard, but it's worth it." Sarah looked up at him. "I'm sure, Samuel. If you're willing, I want to try." "Then we'll try," Samuel agreed, because he had learned that when Sarah set her mind to something, it was usually the right thing to do. 2 years passed, years of hard work and steady growth. The ranch continued to prosper, and Samuel hired a third hand to help with the increased workload. Stephen grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's hazel eyes and his father's stubborn chin, running around the ranch on chubby legs and chattering constantly. Sarah became pregnant again when Stephen was 2, and this time Samuel was better prepared for the fear and the joy. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the early spring, Sarah gave birth to twin girls. They named them Emma and Alice, and Samuel stared in wonder at his 3 children, unable to believe that his life had become so full. The girls were smaller than Stephen had been, and they required twice the work, but Sarah handled it with grace and humor. Samuel often found her nursing both babies at once while Stephen played at her feet, and the image would make his heart clench with love. The ranch had to expand to accommodate the growing family. Samuel built an addition to the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. He hired carpenters from town to help, and Sarah supervised the work, making sure every detail was to her exacting standards. Jack Morrison married a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Lucy, and they moved into a small house that Samuel built for them on the edge of the property. Tom remained a bachelor, content with his bunkhouse and his work, but he became a beloved uncle figure to the Edwards children, carving toys for them and telling them stories about his cowboy days. As the children grew, the ranch became a place of laughter and chaos, of muddy boots on the porch and toys scattered in the yard. Sarah managed it all with efficiency and love, teaching the children to read and write, to work hard and be kind, to appreciate the land and the animals that sustained them. Samuel watched his wife with awe, seeing how she balanced everything with such apparent ease. She was 45 now, with more silver in her hair and lines around her eyes, and he thought she was more beautiful than ever. The years had added depth to her beauty, had given her a richness that youth could never match. One evening, when the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Samuel and Sarah sat on the porch as they had so many times before. Samuel took her hand and laced his fingers through hers. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger, taking on all of this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "No," she said finally. "Not even for a moment. My life before was fine, Samuel. It was safe and predictable. But this life with you, with our children, with all the work and the worry and the joy, this is living. This is what I was meant for." "I feel the same way." Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I used to think I needed a young wife, someone I could mold and shape, but what I really needed was you. Someone with enough experience to know herself, enough strength to challenge me, enough wisdom to build something real with me." Good thing you like experience, Sarah said with a laugh, echoing his words from that first day. Best decision I ever made, Samuel agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains, and Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A mail-order bride older than expected had become the love of his life, his partner in every sense of the word. Their ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the county, their family had flourished, and their love had deepened with every passing year. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, childhood illnesses and financial worries. But they faced everything together, Sarah and Samuel, partners in work and in life. And when the challenges passed, as they always did, they were stronger for having weathered them side by side. As the years continued to roll by, Stephen grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning the business from the ground up and showing promise as a cattleman. The twins grew into lively girls who were as comfortable on horseback as they were in the kitchen, their mother's daughters through and through. Samuel added more land to the ranch, purchasing the property of a neighbor who retired and moved to San Francisco. They now ran 500 head of cattle and had established a reputation for breeding quality horses. The Edwards Ranch was known throughout the region as a model of success and efficiency, and Samuel knew that it was due in large part to Sarah's business acumen and her tireless work. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Margaret Wheeler, who had become like a grandmother to them, and took the train to the city. Sarah had never seen the ocean, and Samuel wanted to give her that experience. They stayed in a fine hotel and ate in restaurants with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. They walked along the beach, Sarah marveling at the endless expanse of water, and they attended the theater, seeing a performance of Shakespeare that left Sarah breathless with delight. For a week, they were just a man and his wife, free from the responsibilities of the ranch and the children, able to focus entirely on each other. On their last night in the city, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching the fog roll in from the bay, Samuel gave Sarah a gift. It was a locket, gold and delicate, with space for photographs inside. "I want you to put pictures of the children in it," Samuel said as he fastened it around her neck, "so you always carry them close to your heart." Sarah touched the locket with trembling fingers, then turned and threw her arms around Samuel's neck. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this, for everything, for seeing me that first day and choosing to build a life with me anyway. It was never anyway, Sarah, it was because of who you are, because of everything you brought to my life. I chose you, and I would choose you again every single day." They kissed as the fog swirled around them, as the city lights twinkled below, and Samuel felt the same surge of love and desire he had felt on their wedding night 10 years earlier. Age had not diminished what they had. If anything, it had intensified it, had given it layers and nuances that only time could provide. When they returned to the ranch, the children rushed out to greet them, Stephen tall and gangly at 12, the twins beautiful at 8 with their mother's smile and their father's determination. Samuel swept them all into a hug, grateful to be home, grateful for everything this life had given him. The Edwards family continued to thrive. Stephen went to agricultural college in Sacramento, learning modern ranching techniques that he brought back to implement on the ranch. The twins grew into young women who had no shortage of suitors, though both were picky and in no hurry to marry, wanting to be sure they found the kind of partnership their parents had. Sarah's hair turned fully silver, and Samuel's beard went gray. They moved a little slower than they once had, and Samuel sometimes felt the ache in his joints after a long day's work. But they were healthy and content, surrounded by family and the fruits of their labor. Tom Sullivan retired at 65, and Samuel threw him a party that brought together everyone who had worked on the ranch over the years. Jack and Lucy had 4 children of their own, and Jack had become Samuel's right-hand man, running much of the day-to-day operations. Samuel and Sarah were able to step back slightly, to enjoy their grandchildren when they came and to take pride in what they had built. On a warm summer evening, when Samuel was 55 and Sarah was 60, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, and their children and grandchildren were visiting, filling the house with noise and life. "We did good, didn't we?" Sarah said, her hand in Samuel's as always. "We did better than good," Samuel replied. "We built something that will last, Sarah. Something that will outlive us." "The ranch, you mean?" "The ranch, yes, but also the family, the love. We created something real and solid and good. Not many people can say that." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as perfectly as she had 22 years earlier when she first arrived in Sierra City. "I love you, Samuel Edwards. I loved you when I stepped off that stagecoach and saw you standing there, looking nervous and hopeful. And I love you now, even more than I did then. I love you too, Sarah Edwards. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. My mail-order bride who was older than expected and turned out to be exactly what I needed." He kissed the top of her head. "Good thing I like experience." Sarah laughed, the sound as rich and warm as it had been all those years ago, and Samuel felt his heart swell with contentment. They sat together as the sun set over the mountains one more time, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Samuel thought about fate and chance, and the way life could surprise you with gifts you never knew to ask for. Inside the house, their son was teaching his own son how to play checkers. The twins were helping their daughters bake pies in Sarah's kitchen, using her recipes and her techniques. The ranch hands were settling in for the evening, and the cattle were grazing peacefully in the fields. Everything was as it should be. Samuel and Sarah sat on their porch, hands entwined, hearts joined, watching the day fade into night. They had built a life together, brick by brick, day by day, through hard work and commitment, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. And as the stars came out over the Sierra Nevada mountains, they knew that whatever time they had left, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. 2 decades of marriage had taught them that love was not just about the grand gestures or the passionate moments, though they had shared plenty of both. Love was about the daily choice to show up, to work side by side, to support and challenge and cherish each other through every season of life. It was about building something together that was greater than either of them alone, and they had built something magnificent. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm that marks a life well lived. Samuel and Sarah watched their children marry and have children of their own. They celebrated births and mourned losses, welcomed new members to their extended family, and said goodbye to old friends. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's home. When Samuel turned 60, the family threw him a large birthday celebration at the ranch. People came from all over the county, friends and neighbors and business associates, all wanting to honor the man who had built one of the most successful ranches in California. But as Samuel stood on the porch, looking out at the crowd of well-wishers, his eyes sought and found Sarah, still beautiful to him at 62, her silver hair shining in the sunlight. She came to his side as she always did and took his hand. "Happy birthday, my love," she said softly. "Thank you." Samuel pulled her close. "For everything. For every day of these past 27 years, they had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. They had faced drought and disease, financial setbacks, and family crises, but they had never faced anything alone. Sarah had been his partner in every challenge, his companion in every joy, and Samuel could not imagine his life without her. As the years advanced, and they moved into their 60s and then their 70s, the ranch passed more and more into Stephen's capable hands. Sarah and Samuel remained active, still rising early and going to bed late, still working the land they loved. But they also took time to rest, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They traveled some, taking trips to see parts of California they had never visited. They spent long afternoons with their grandchildren, teaching them about the ranch and about life. And they spent quiet evenings on the porch, talking and laughing and remembering. Sarah's health began to fail when she was 78. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual slowing down, a weariness that spoke of a life fully lived. Samuel, at 76, remained vigorous, and he devoted himself to caring for his wife with the same dedication he had once devoted to building their ranch. He helped her dress in the mornings and prepared her favorite foods. He read to her in the afternoons and sat with her on the porch in the evenings, holding her hand and telling her how much she meant to him. Sarah bore her decline with grace and humor, never complaining, always grateful for what she had. On a spring morning much like the one when she had first arrived in Sierra City all those years ago, Sarah woke early and asked Samuel to help her out to the porch. The sun was just rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly, her voice weak but content. "It is," Samuel agreed, his arm around her shoulders, supporting her. "I'm not afraid, you know," Sarah said. "I've had a good life, Samuel. Better than I ever dreamed possible. I have no regrets." "Don't talk like that," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "You're going to be fine." Sarah turned to look at him with those hazel eyes that had captivated him 50 years earlier. "Samuel, my love, we both know that's not true. And that's all right. We've had 50 beautiful years together. We've raised wonderful children. We've built something that will last long after we're gone. I'm ready." "I'm not," Samuel said, tears running down his weathered face. "I'm not ready to lose you, Sarah. You'll never lose me." Sarah raised her hand to his face, wiping away his tears. "I'll always be with you in everything we built together, in our children and their children. And when your time comes, I'll be waiting for you. I promise." They sat together on the porch, watching the sun rise over their land, and Sarah's breathing grew slower and more peaceful. As the golden light touched the mountains and the new day began, Sarah Victoria Edwards took her last breath, her hand in her husband's hand, her head on his shoulder at peace. Samuel held her for a long time, unable to let go, unable to accept that she was gone. But eventually, Stephen came to find them, and he helped his father carry Sarah inside, both men weeping for the woman who had been the center of their world. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the impact Sarah had made on her community over 50 years. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could forever watch over the land she had helped build into something extraordinary. Samuel grieved deeply, as was right and proper. But he did not give up on life. He remembered Sarah's words about building something that would last, and he dedicated himself to honoring her memory by continuing their work. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, sharing stories about Sarah, making sure they understood what an exceptional woman she had been. He ran the ranch for 5 more years, still capable and competent despite his age. But at 81, Samuel began to feel his own body slowing down, and he knew his time was coming. He was not afraid. In fact, He felt a quiet anticipation, knowing that Sarah was waiting for him. On a summer evening, exactly 55 years after the day Sarah had first arrived in Sierra City, Samuel asked his family to gather. His children and grandchildren and even some great-grandchildren came to the ranch house, filling it with warmth and love. Samuel sat in his favorite chair on the porch, surrounded by his family, and told them stories about Sarah, about their life together, about the mail-order bride who had been older than expected and had turned out to be the greatest blessing of his life. "She made me better than I was," Samuel said, his voice still strong despite his age. "She challenged me and supported me and loved me unconditionally. And I want you all to remember that true love isn't about age or appearance or meeting some ideal. It's about finding someone who sees you for who you really are and chooses to build a life with you anyway. That's what Sarah and I had. That's what I hope all of you will find." His family listened, many of them crying, all of them grateful for the legacy of love and dedication that Samuel and Sarah had left them. That night, Samuel went to bed in the room he had shared with Sarah for 50 years. He looked at the picture of her on the bedside table, her face young and smiling, and he smiled back. "I'm coming, my love," he whispered. "Wait for me just a little longer." He closed his eyes and thought about the day he had stood in Sierra City, nervous and uncertain, waiting for a mail-order bride he had never met. He thought about the moment Sarah had stepped off that stagecoach, older than he expected, confident and strong and everything he hadn't known he needed. He thought about every day they had spent together, every challenge they had faced, every joy they had shared. And Samuel Edwards went to sleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of the woman he had loved for 55 years, the woman who would be waiting for him on the other side of whatever came next. He passed peacefully in his sleep, and when his family found him the next morning, they all agreed that he looked content, as if he had finally arrived at a destination he had been eagerly anticipating. They buried him beside Sarah on the hill overlooking the ranch, and on the shared headstone, Stephen had carved a simple inscription that captured everything his parents had meant to each other. Samuel and Sarah Edwards, partners in life and in love forever together. The Edwards Ranch continued to thrive under Stephen's leadership and was eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. And for generations to come, the story was told of Samuel and Sarah, of the mail-order bride who was older than expected, and the cowboy who said that was exactly what he wanted, of two people who took a chance on each other and built a legacy of love that would last forever.